In May of 1973, a massive, climate-controlled enclosure in a Maryland laboratory sat perfectly quiet. The internal hoppers were packed with food. The water bottles were full. The temperature was mathematically ideal. But inside this 9-foot geometric structure, there was not a single living mouse. The man who built this enclosure was an ethologist, a scientist studying animal behavior named John B. Calhoun. For decades, he had chased a deeply unsettling question. What happens to a functioning society when the physical friction of daily survival is entirely removed? He called this latest experiment Universe 25. He placed exactly 8 founder mice inside a meticulously engineered environment. There were no predators, no diseases to fight off, and no scarcity of any resource. John Calhoun had constructed a closed-system trap. He intentionally placed these creatures in a world where every natural escape valve was sealed off, forcing them toward a predetermined psychological breaking point. We are left with a stark contradiction. In a society provided with every material resource necessary for survival, the population somehow systematically engineered its own total extinction. This graph tracks Universe 25. For the first year, the population exploded, doubling every 55 days. But then the line abruptly flatlines at 2,200 mice. A strange deviation because the enclosure was designed to comfortably support 3,800 animals with plenty of space left. While the floor plan remained open, the social hierarchy had crystallized. A few dominant males seized the prime nesting apartments along the walls, leaving a massive crowd of surplus young males permanently trapped in the center of the floor with no territory to claim. These idle crowds triggered what Calhoun called a behavioral sink. Even though identical food was equally available everywhere, the mice began compulsively crowding around a few specific hoppers. The simple act of eating became so heavily wired into the presence of others that they would refuse to eat from empty feeders, packing tightly around overloaded stations instead. While calories and nesting boxes were still abundant, the social space inside the enclosure had evaporated. With no room to exist as individuals, the colony descended into systemic madness. The first major break in the social fabric was the collapse of the maternal instinct. Normal mouse society relies on males patrolling the territory while females nurse, but the dominant males grew exhausted from the constant crowding and stopped defending their families. Left to protect the nests entirely alone in a high-stress environment, mothers began abandoning their litters or even attacking their own young. While the center of the enclosure dissolved into constant, chaotic violence, a completely different reaction formed on the edges. A new group of mice emerged, and they were entirely silent. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. These were a generation of mice who completely opted out of fighting, mating, and socializing. They spent their entire lives in total isolation, dedicating all their energies strictly to eating, sleeping, and obsessively grooming themselves. The biological mechanism driving this is severe. These mice grew up in an environment where absolutely every social role was already occupied. Because they had no function to serve, their nervous systems failed to develop the capacity for complex societal behaviors like courtship or territorial defense. Calhoun identified this stage as the first death. It was the death of the spirit and the social fabric. The physical bodies of the mice would survive for years inside their perfect prison, but their society was already gone. When these findings went public, they caused an immediate sensation. Politicians and public figures quickly weaponized the results, formally entering Calhoun's papers into the record at the United States Senate as doomsday proof of what was destined to happen to humanity. People projected the trauma of Universe 25 directly onto modern cities. They looked at the rapidly growing urban sprawl of the 20th century and saw a direct parallel to the trapped mice in the Maryland laboratory. Today, however, scientists push back heavily on that interpretation. Universe 25 is no longer viewed as a clean study of overpopulation. Instead, researchers look at the data and see a study of severely unequal resource distribution, exacerbated by the hard boundaries of an inescapable prison. Calhoun's analysis suggests the lethality of the experiment came from the total exhaustion of social roles, rather than the abundance of resources. Once every meaningful position in the colony was filled, the surplus mice simply stopped functioning as a species. Drawing a straight, terrifying line from caged rodents to human cities is biologically flawed. It ignores humanity's unique evolutionary advantage, our ability to consciously redefine the boundaries of our own environment. We have a built-in failsafe against the behavioral sink. Calhoun described this sociological concept as ideational generativity. Look at how this works in practice. When physical territory runs out, mice are trapped, but humans can break past physical limits and expand into conceptual space. We invent art, we build digital networks, and we create entirely new economic roles out of thin air. Calhoun himself was far from a doomer. He spent the remainder of his career designing new, modified universes, testing specific variables to discover exactly what it would take to keep a dense society thriving without collapsing. The autopsy of Universe 25 proves that pure physical abundance isn't enough. A functioning society requires friction and a sense of purpose. But unlike the mice locked in a perfect trap, we hold the tools to continuously invent our own reasons to exist.